I guess 2 or 3 months back, I did a video about the nickel iron Edison batteries that we got in, and we installed those. And that ended up being a video that got a lot of hits and a lot of controversy, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word that comes to my mind. But there's a lot of people that have come out and said, man, if I'd have known that you were going to get iron Edisons, I would have told you to get lithium-ion batteries. They're the best in the West and the best in the world, and you're a fool for getting those expensive nickel-iron batteries. And, you know, different batteries are best for different situations. And I think what I'm going to do in this video is just kind of break down the different kinds of batteries that there are, and explain why I chose the nickel-iron Edison batteries over lithium-ion or wet cell, lead acid, or any of the other things. So let's get started, and we're going to get down on this.
I'm free and it feels like my heart's exploding, like I could touch the sky. All the plans that I have made finally become real. Yeah.
There's several battery types that are the most common in use, and one of those is wet cell batteries. Another type is sealed lead acid batteries. The next one is AGM batteries. Then you have lithium-ion batteries and nickel-iron batteries, and we'll go through and talk a little bit about each of these and what their benefits are and what their disadvantages are. So we'll do kind of an advantage and disadvantage comparison here. First one that we're going to talk about is the wet cells. That's the most common type of battery. I can't say that they've been around the longest, but they've been the most common for the last, 70, 80 years anyway. They're relatively speaking, in terms of batteries, the cheapest batteries. You have to add water to them whenever you're using them. You have to occasionally equalize those batteries, and that's where you give them a real slight overcharge. Kind of kicks that sulfation off the plates. I've got a video on my personal channel about how you equalize those batteries. They're good for around 1600 deep cycles. A cycle is where you run it down to what's considered to be dead. So if you have a 12 volt system, dead is going to be considered 10.5 volts, even though you've still got voltage there. 10.5 is considered dead for a regular lead acid battery. They're affected pretty much by temperature, so the colder it gets, the less of a storage it appears that it has. So if you've got like a 600 amp hour battery and you get down close to freezing, that 600 amp hours is going to be more equivalent to 400 or even 200 amp hours, depending on, the different variables that there are. They're obviously not good for electric vehicles because of the fact that you have to add water in them. They're not sealed. They have the little caps that you twist off the tops of them and you fill with water. So if you put it in an electric vehicle, every time you hit a bump, you're going to have that acid in there that's going to slosh around, and it'll rust out the compartment that they're in, and it'll eventually just go away to nothing. It'll just eat through it. The cost of these batteries are generally around the $150 per kilowatt hour range. So, if you get say a 100 kilowatt hour battery bank, you're going to pay about $1,500 for 100 kilowatt hours in one of these batteries. The next battery that we're going to talk about is going to be sealed batteries. They're the same as the wet cells. They're lead acid. They've got electrolyte in them. The only difference is they're sealed and you can't add water to them. Most of them will have vents in them, so if you are charging them real heavily and they're starting to outgas, the vents will allow the gas to escape, but they don't allow, pretty much any leaking or any air to get back into it. Aside from that, they're pretty identical to wet cell batteries. The only big difference is you don't water them. So for convenience sake, or if they're in a really remote location, back in the 70s and 80s, they were pretty common in very remote areas where they would have, say, like a microwave tower just out in the middle of nowhere, and they might send someone out once or twice a year just to check on everything, make sure that it's still running fine. And because of the fact that they're sealed, you can't equalize them, because if you give them that equalizing charge, they start outgassing, and you might actually outrun their ability to vent, and in that case they could crack from all the pressure that's inside. And because you can't equalize them, they generally have a shorter lifespan because they start to sulfate over time, and you just can't really get much more use out of them. So they tend to have a much shorter lifespan, around 500 or 600 cycles. You can get a little bit more out of them. It just kind of depends on who makes them and what their specifications are. The advantages to these is they're not affected by motion, and because they're sealed, you can install them on their side or on their back or straight up. Generally don't put them on their side because the plates, they're not full of water, so you'll end up with some plates that are actually out of the water. So, but as far as like an electric vehicle, they've been kind of popular in golf carts. Because as they bounce around when you're driving them, well, the electrolyte stays inside the battery. So that makes them suitable for some kinds of vehicles, autonomous robots and this kind of stuff. They were used down for, back in the 80s and 90s when they were kind of popular. Cost of these batteries tend to be around 150 to 170 kilowatt, or $150 to $170 per kilowatt hour. The next battery that we're going to talk about is AGMs, and I have quite a bit of experience with AGMs. I went through 2 sets of those, and they do have some advantages. If you treat them right, you never have to water them. You can gently equalize them to kind of help them last a little bit longer. The difference between AGM and sealed batteries is they basically have this like a fiberglass mat in between all of the plates, and the electrolyte is absorbed into that fiberglass mat. Well, AGM stands for absorbed glass mat. So you have these little slivers of fiberglass blankets or batting or whatever you'd want to call it between the plates, and it basically keeps all of that electrolyte wicked up in between all of the plates that are throughout the battery. So a real big advantage to that is they're not subject to the same shipping limitations that wet cells and sealed batteries are, because if a sealed battery gets a puncture, you still have electrolyte that'll leak out. Well, because of an AGM battery's glass mat inside there, if they're punctured, the electrolyte doesn't leak out, because the fiberglass mats are just saturated with the electrolyte inside the battery, so they don't leak. They're also considered explosion proof. So something that I didn't say about the sealed batteries that is also true with AGMs is you can actually put them inside your house. You don't have to have them vented. They're not really prone to explosions like the wet cells are. Some of them do require equalizing, but not all. In fact, most don't, so they tend to have more of the limited lifespan also. And again, these are good for uh, vehicles or autonomous robots that have some motion where there can be a little bouncing around because the electrolyte stays inside of it. These can be operated in absolutely any position, upside down, right side up, to the left, to the right, on the back, on the front. They're really good for where you need to be able to mount them in funky ways that other batteries wouldn't be able to mount. So where you've got certain space constraints and that type of thing, AGM batteries are awesome for that. Prices of AGMs probably are around $200 a kilowatt hour, which is pretty good, but not that great either. Now we're going to move on to the lithium-ion batteries. Now, these are the cat's meow for 75% of the people out there. The people that have looked at these batteries just swear by them. And it's true. They're awesome batteries. A lot of the positives about them is they're very lightweight. They have about half the space requirements of a wet cell or a sealed battery or an AGM battery. So, where you've got where space is a premium, they just don't take up that much space. So they're awesome batteries where space constraints apply. Also, they have a very high energy density, and that, of course, is because of the fact that they use only half of the space requirements of a wet cell, and they're lighter weight. They have a good lifespan, usually on the order of 2,000 cycles, which is considered pretty awesome. Again, these aren't affected by motion at all. It's the most common battery to be used in motion vehicles. It's the choice for autonomous robots these days. They're just, they can put out a lot of power at one time, and they can be charged very quickly also. It makes them very desirable for a lot of applications and for good reason. One of the drawbacks to lithium ions are they have to have great care in their charging, because as you charge the cells, each cell really needs to be monitored, because out of a whole pack of batteries you could have one cell that starts overheating, and once it reaches its breakover point, then all of a sudden it just really overheats and it catches on fire, and then the whole battery pack is basically on fire. If you shoot it, you've got, if not an explosion, you got one heck of an aggressive fire on your hands. So for outer space, they're great, where you've got them in the vacuum of space. If they're hit by a meteor or whatever, it's going to short out and it'll burn itself up, but it's useless. Of course, you have the same problem with lead acids or any of the other batteries out there. But other than having to really take great care because of their high energy density, they're awesome batteries. It takes a high cost in circuitry to charge these batteries, because you have to really closely monitor all the cells, or at the very least you have to monitor the temperature of the groups of cells, so that you're kind of getting a proximity temperature wise, so you can back off that charging if any area or any cell starts getting overheated. So even though the lithium ion batteries are pretty price comparative to say the wet cells and the AGMs and this kind of thing, you're going to have a higher cost in your charging. You're going to have a higher cost in your energy conversion to run the inverters, because most of these have a voltage of anywhere from 360 to 400 and some odd volts, 480 I think it is. Nominal voltage is typically, I think, 380 volts for a lithium ion pack. So you either have to have a specialized inverter that runs off of these, or you got to break the pack down into smaller voltages. And either way, in my opinion, it's still kind of a hassle. They're not really developed enough where that you can just go down and buy them off the shelf. Most people have got hacked battery packs out of electric vehicles that they run their houses on, or they'll buy the Tesla Powerwall, which again, that comes with its own inverter package and charging package, and it's, in my opinion, yeah, the battery pack's not that expensive, but man, all the electronics that back that up really put it through the roof. So, yeah, you're going to have people say, man, the battery packs for lithium-ion, I got a deal, I got mine for a couple $1,000s, and it's, 40 kilowatt hours or whatever, which is fine, but, not all of us out in the real world have access to an electric vehicle that's been parted out, and you can buy a battery pack for $2,000. And let me tell you something, here in Hawaii, anybody that's got an electric vehicle, you got these idiots out here that'll try to cut your batteries out of your electric car because they know they can get some money for them. So there's a demand for them all over the place. But, don't sit there and tell me, oh, but Steve, I got this great deal on these batteries and I got them out of a wrecked car and you can find them everywhere. You can't find them in Hawaii. So you can't find them everywhere. And maybe you can find them where you're at. And if so, that's wonderful. Hack away, make your YouTube videos about it and share it with the world, because there are other people in your situation. There's also people in my situation where they're just not obtainable unless you have an electric vehicle, and that's better to drive that than it is to run your house on it, in my opinion. Again, it all boils down to opinion. So now that I've kind of stated the reasons I don't have lithium-ion batteries to power my house, here's the look at on nickel-iron batteries. We're going to talk a little bit about those Edison batteries now. They have a lighter weight than the lead-acid batteries. They're heavier than the lithium-ion batteries. They've got what's really a very low energy density, which pretty much means that their efficiency isn't as good as even a lead-acid battery. It's nowhere near as good as a lithium-ion battery. You got to have 4 times the space of a lead-acid battery for nickel-iron batteries, which means you have to have 8 times the space for nickel-iron batteries that you do for lithium-ion batteries. And they're not good for where motion is, where you got motion like in a vehicle or a robot or whatever, and the amount of room that they would take just makes them prohibitive to start with. Now, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I believe that the nickel-iron battery was actually invented by a German tinkerer, and then improved on by Edison, and they were used in a lot of vehicles that were electric back in those days when electric vehicles first tried to take off. So, they just kind of went to the wayside because their energy density is really low, that you got to have a lot of real estate to put them in. You got to have a good enough size compartment to keep them in. That's the big thing about them. And to a lot of people, that makes them pretty much unusable. I understand that. That's fine. Now let's talk about, there is one more bad thing about these batteries, that they don't use acid for the electrolyte, which is cool, because you don't have to worry about the acid eating things up. However, they do use an electrolyte that's caustic, or at the opposite end of the spectrum of acid, which is base. They're very, very base. You can use, the most common electrolyte is potassium hydroxide. And the sodium hydroxide, you can also use that, which is basically just lye. So it's a very easy to obtain electrolyte. It's easier to obtain than sulfuric acid for lead acid batteries. So let's talk about some of the advantages to these batteries, which leads up to why I chose them to power my home with. Probably the first advantage that I really like about them is you can run them completely flat and it doesn't damage them. And by flat, I mean on a lead acid battery or lithium-ion battery for a 12-volt pack, 10.5 volts is considered dead. Not on a nickel iron battery pack. 0 volts is considered flat. You can run them all the way down to absolutely 0 volts, and when you get to a point where you can charge them again, you can charge them right back up and no damage at all whatsoever. On the opposite side of that, you can overcharge them. You can overcharge them to just about 1.5 times, and you'll boil them up. You'll start getting them hot if you're not careful by overcharging them. The thing is, with AGM batteries and sealed batteries, you overcharge them, and you're gonna basically have a explosion, or the batteries are gonna burst from the pressure. You overcharge wet cell, you're gonna ruin it because the plates will start to warp. And on lithium ion, because of the circuitry that's required, they're very delicate to being overcharged. You really have a fire on your hands if you overcharge those critters. Another thing that I like about the nickel iron batteries, and this is the reason I have them, their lifespan is unlimited. Lithium-ion batteries wear out after their number of cycles is completed. If you get a set that they'll last you for 2,000 cycles, you might get a set that'll last 2,300. I'll even give you 3,000 cycles. But after it's been used time and time again, charged and discharged, it's done. You got to go get a new pack. That's all there is to it. So you're out another, $8,000 or whatever to buy another battery pack. The price of nickel iron batteries is about $800 a kilowatt hour, and my friend, I'm going to tell you, I'm not arguing, that stings, and it stings a lot. But the thing is whenever, if you say that the world just goes to hell in a handbasket, and all you've got is what you've got and where you're at, and I have a lot of people approach me about that, and I'm not really so much into SHTF stuff as a lot of other people out there. I'm off grid because I like not having a bill. I don't like having to depend on anyone for anything. I'll buy my stuff initially, and after that, I don't want to have to buy anything ever again for as long as I live. So the nickel iron batteries have literally an unlimited lifespan to some degree. What you do have to do as far as their maintenance goes is you might have to replace the electrolyte every 20 years, 30 years, something like that. A lot of that depends on its exposure to the atmosphere. The atmosphere changes the chemical properties of the electrolyte over time, and I don't remember offhand what it does to it exactly, the chemical change that occurs, but it basically gets less base over time, and its pH moves more to neutral, and it gets to the point that you can charge them, but it just doesn't seem like they last as long. Much like a lead acid battery. But a lead acid battery is just not likely going to last you any more than about 10 years, and neither is a lithium-ion battery. 10, 12 years is about as good as you could ever hope for out of one of those. So, you say, well, you still got to buy your electrolyte for your nickel iron batteries, and that's true. Potassium hydroxide would cost me about $12 to recharge my batteries. Dump out the old electrolyte, neutralize it with some vinegar, or whatever it takes to neutralize it. Um, or I could go to sodium hydroxide or lye, and that would cost me about $6.50. Now, the bad thing about sodium hydroxide or the lye is that it interacts with the atmosphere a little bit quicker. So you'd have to change that more often, like every 15 to 20 years or 25 years, depending on its exposure to the atmosphere. The first set of nickel iron batteries that I had was a set of batteries that came from Hungary. And I spent, I think it was $2,500 for a 300 amp hour battery set that was 24 volts. So it was way cheaper than they are today. And I think that really the reason that they cost so much is partly because of the cost of nickel. Nickel just costs a lot of money, and they're making a lot of stainless steel things these days, and that's driven the price way up. And then also because there's just not a real huge demand for them. Lithium ions, the price is getting driven down more and more because of the demand. I had a guy that told me a while back, well, okay, you talk about, those of us that are SHTF, end of world people, what do you do on doomsday? And your electrolyte goes bad, then how do you, what are you going to do then? If you can't buy the electrolyte, what are you going to do? You're just going to be dead like everybody else. You're going to be dead in the water. And that's not really true, because you can make your own lye. Our ancestors in America would make their own soap, their own lye soap. And they didn't buy the lye. You actually make your own lye, and it's basically just you take wood ashes from a fire, and the lye is extracted out of these ashes just basically using water, and it soaks into these ashes, and I forget the exact process it's called, but you basically just hang it up in a bag, and it leaches out through those ashes, and you just pour your water in at the top, and as the water goes through and out the bottom, your bottom is pretty high concentration of lye. Or in my case, that leached water that comes through the bag is my electrolyte. And I would put that in my batteries, and I'm back on the road again. I can do that all by myself. All I need is a magnifying glass and some sunshine, and I'm going to make my line. My batteries are going to keep on running. One of the ways that they try to keep the electrolyte in a nickel iron battery isolated from the atmosphere is back in the 1800s and early 1900s, they would put a thin layer of mineral oil into the battery, because oil floats. It's got a lower density than water, and it has a lower density than the electrolyte. The oil would just float on top of that electrolyte. So that would give the separation between the electrolyte and the atmosphere. And that's what allows the electrolyte to last the 20, 30 years, depending on how much you really do keep it isolated. Now, the set of batteries that I had from Hungary, if I wasn't careful and I put a little bit too much water in and they started getting a really good charge, the gas bubbles that come up through the electrolyte would start foaming up that oil, and that oil would foam completely out of the battery and just get all over everything. And it didn't hurt anything, but it was just a nasty mess, and it was kind of a pain. And these new batteries that I got just recently, you don't put oil on the top of these. They come with these caps here. And it's pretty ingenious, really. But these screw into the top of the batteries. You pop up the top, and then you can put your water in to fill the battery. And then you can see it's got this little ball here that seals this little funnel thing. So it allows the gas to escape, because as the gas goes up, well, it just raises that little rubber ball. And then whenever you're not charging, well, then that ball just sits on the bottom of that and seals it. So it doesn't get to that nitrogen and the other elements that are in the atmosphere. So these are what they use pretty much now to keep the atmosphere out of the electrolyte in the nickel iron batteries. So that's kind of a cool idea. The only thing is I'm sure that this doesn't achieve a perfect seal. So it's still going to get some air in there, but you know, overall, I think it's pretty good. They still claim that you get 20 to 30 years before you got to change the electrolyte. Maybe these in combination with oil might be better. I don't know. The longevity of the nickel iron batteries is the reason that I chose them for my house, and also because if need be, I can make my own electrolyte for those batteries. I don't have to go anywhere and buy it from anyone. I can make it from things that are readily available in nature. Granted, I would like to have a better battery bank or a pack of batteries that has a higher energy density, but until they can make lithium-ion batteries for like $5, you know, where I can change them out every 10 years, or they come out with a new technology that has the density of lithium-ion with the longevity of nickel iron, I'm very happy that I've chosen nickel iron. It's my second set of batteries, and I think that for this home, it's ideal. And there are a lot of people out there that think lithium-ion is ideal for their home, and it very well could be. You know, everyone has different needs, everyone has different requirements, and you might need a set of batteries where you can really punch the power into them and charge them up quickly, and then draw a lot of power out of them really quickly because you're running welders or compressors or whatever that's just industrial strength. And in those cases, that's exactly ideal. It's perfect. It's what you need. For my situation, the nickel irons fit my bill to a T. I don't ever have to worry about overcharging them. I don't ever have to worry about running them down so bad that they're ruined. I just live. And if you know, if the world goes to hell in a handbasket, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning, I'm going to make me a pot of coffee.
I'm free and it feels